The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, it's Karl Thomson here from StorageCraft. I'm currently based in New Zealand. I work with the Australia and New Zealand teams as a sales engineer. So just giving our attendees a couple of minutes here just to log in. Should be getting ready to start in a minute or so. Basically, everyone's on mute for the webinar. If anyone's got any questions, please type them in during my presentation. There's plenty of time at the end for me to go back and cover anything off in more detail, show you something in a live demonstration, or answer any of your questions. So please use the questions. I'm also recording the webinar, so the recording will be sent out to everyone afterwards, a link, and it will be published on our StorageCraft APAC YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to go over any of the content that I've covered off, there'll be a couple of methods of making that available to you. So just giving us another 30 seconds or so here. Hopefully everyone can see my screen and hear me okay. All right, okay, so we're good to get underway. So again, this webinar today is on, is your disaster recovery strategy ransomware ready? And this is the key thing, is making sure that you're protecting yourselves and aware of the capabilities of the StorageCraft solution to ensure ultra-fast recovery. Now, obviously, to understand what we need to protect ourselves from, we need to understand where the problem lies. So I always like to talk statistics and understand the causes of unplanned downtime. Now, obviously this webinar is about ransomware. So in here you can see application operational errors. That consumes 80%. So ransomware would actually sit across the board statistically of that. We've got 20% for natural disaster, security, power, and hardware operating system. I guess the key thing here is actually that natural disasters are just 3% of unplanned downtime. So 97% of the time, you're going to want the ability to rapidly recover back on site. I don't want to fail over off-site or in the cloud or perform a full restore somewhere else if my on-prem is still okay, and that's where I want to revert back to. So I think it's the key thing to understand. With ShadowProtect, it's not just a backup product, it's a disaster recovery solution. So you need to bear that in mind. Some of the challenges, some of these have actually come from North America, but 85% of critical systems aren't backed up at all. That's a massive challenge that people experience. Data growth rates are doubling every 2 years now versus every 4 years. And this might have a big factor on the first issue. Systems, as they double in growth, they become, they're consuming storage. It becomes more challenging to back up, and then obviously consumes more storage, and we have to deal with replication or archival of that. So these are challenges. Up to 40% of backup restores fail. Now that's quite alarming if you consider that only 15% of critical systems are being backed up correctly in the first place, and then now we're saying up to 40% of backup restores fail. That's alarming. So we need to ensure that you are testing your backups, that you can recover, and there's a lot of mechanisms in the StorageCraft solution to do that. Ransomware losses in 2016, $1 billion. I mean, that's a huge amount of money. These people doing this are very incentivized to try and profit from this, so they're not going to stop. 247 new ransomware families in 2016 alone, so significant 752% increase on 2015. So these are things that are just going to get worse and worse. Now, some of the warnings, really it comes down to it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. And so we need to protect ourselves and safeguard that data. And I'm just going to cover off some of this stuff quite quickly. The Homeland Security published last year on their website about this whole Locky thing, and that's pretty big to see someone like this publishing concerns. It's relevant in local news. We've got massive malware attacks. We've got Australian banks, and that was two-factor. We've got Australian Post, we've got Crypto Locker in the news. This is all stuff that's happening. CIO activities ticking up. You can now insure yourself against this type of stuff. The register's talking about millions of looming in the ransomware wave. You've got this and encryption, and if anyone's ever seen it before, it locks you out completely of your data until you pay the money. And they've got a whole Wikipedia on how easy it is to pay them. Very well documented process. So I think the key thing here, and again, I apologize that some of the stuff has come across as North American statistics, but I think it's still relevant. They're saying that 40% of businesses experienced a malware attack, so that's a huge percentage. 20% of the target companies ceased operations because of the damage they suffered, and more than 80% of the organizations that were breached, average size of over 5,000 employees, had high value data compromised. So these are pretty big numbers, but this is real. This is what's happening now. And I think a key thing, particularly with our IT partners, is understanding, helping the customer understand the cost of downtime. Looking at how many employees do they have, what's maybe an average hourly salary. If they're only backing up once a day and something happens in the evening, that's 8 hours of data loss. If they have to revert back to the previous day, but then takes them 2 days to recover, that's now 3 days. Times the number of employees and hours. You can start to put a cost to it. And then there's obviously other costs. While you were down and one of your customers needed to call you and you couldn't help them, has that customer now gone to someone else? There's a lifetime value to a customer. So there's a lot of different tools and calculators and things that can help a customer sit down and understand the cost to their business. And it's about changing that conversation from saying I can't afford a proper solution to saying I can't afford not to. Now, looking at the solution side of things, so obviously everything needs to pivot on recovery. If we can't recover, then there's no point going down this place in the first place. So you're going to see in this webinar, we're going to talk a lot about best practice and ensuring that the recovery is available. But obviously it starts with having a reliable backup. We want to back up frequently throughout the day, and ShadowProtect can back up every 15 minutes because it doesn't have that disruption to users. So that's a really key thing. Obviously a key, which we're going to talk a lot about today, is offsite replication. We need to get that stuff offsite. We need to isolate it. We need to have multiple copies of those backups so that if something did go wrong or did compromise on-prem, we've got somewhere else to recover or get that data back. Obviously, being able to recover on-site or off-site gives you that flexibility. But in most scenarios, 97% of the time, we actually want to recover back on site. We don't want to fail over a single VM somewhere else and then have to network and route and then get it back. So that's the key thing. And having a solution that can cater for physical, virtual, and cloud environments is obviously key in today's hybrid world. So the other thing is obviously the cloud adoption. As people are moving their content into SaaS applications in the cloud, we need to think about protecting that stuff as well. So things like Microsoft Office 365 or Google's G Suite, people are now actively using that stuff. We used to back up their Exchange server when they ran it on-prem. Now we've moved into the cloud. Yes, you've got high availability, you've got geographical redundancy, you've got all the resiliency and the number of nines that they provide. But at the end of the day, if someone deletes something or there's some sort of malicious activity and that data gets compromised, how much retention do you have available before that stuff's not recoverable again? Or how long would it take one of these providers to actually recover it? So this is another key understanding, is just because we're moving stuff into the cloud doesn't mean you don't need to back it up anymore. Looking at some of the recovery things and where our portfolio fits in, obviously we've got the StorageCraft file backup and recovery, primarily for those mobile laptop workloads. We've obviously got ShadowProtect solution across virtual, physical, on-prem environments. And then obviously replications built into that solution. So with Image Manager, you can replicate to your own off-site location, you can replicate into public clouds or into our purpose-built disaster recovery center. And then we've got the StorageCraft cloud backup for Office 365 and G Suite. So we've got a lot of tools available in our solution set to ensure that we can back up and recover where we need to. Now, some of the key things, obviously, as takeaways from this, is we want to be able to back up frequently throughout the day. This is the RPO. It's not acceptable anymore. A lot of businesses don't understand, or they believe that they're satisfied as long as they can back up once a day. The reality is that can come at a high cost. No one wants to have to re-enter their data. Protecting your backups and replicate a copy off site. So again, this is something that we'll be focusing on shortly, is particularly with the standard of ShadowProtect and people moving towards continuous incrementals to leverage cloud and replication. We need to have copies of that backup chain. We need to ensure that the chain and the backups are secured so that they can't get infected, and we need to ensure that we've got copies of that. And there's obviously the 3-2-1 rule of having the 3 copies of your data. And we need to, because if something compromised those backups and then infected our servers, then we might not have another copy. If the other copy is on a direct sync, we might find that the offsite copy could get impacted as well. So we need to look at what types of replication technology we're using. Are we using the built-in verification methods to do that with the StorageCraft solution? And where is that being stored and what's available at that other side? So we'll talk about that. And obviously ensuring you can recover quickly. So again, 97% of the time, we want to rapidly recover back on site. Are you backing up to a NAS or a USB drive? That might be limiting your recoverability. If you've got a dedicated backup server or a BDR, or you're backing up to some high performance NAS, then maybe you can virtualize straight off those backups. And that's what you want to start looking at, is the ability to recover quickly. And then testing your backups. There's no point backing up if you can't recover, and the only way you know you can recover is you're doing regular tests. There's built-in automated testing in Image Manager where it can boot those backup images up and do screenshot verification. Image Manager does a lot of verification built in by default as well, but we need to ensure you need to visualize and actually see for yourself that those backups are recoverable. And the built-in cloud services has got the ability to take a screenshot and destroy your VMs after you've done tests as well. So this is really key. And again, we need to know that we can get a business up and running again immediately after a disaster. That's the whole point. So let's go in and talk about some best practice. Let's talk about safeguarding the data. I think something interesting I came across on LinkedIn the other day from a Gartner person is they're saying that some 60% of digital businesses will suffer at least one major service failure by 2020 due to the inability of IT security teams to manage digital risk. So that's all of us. That's all the IT guys out there managing their customers' data, managing their business. Is we need to understand where the risks are and ensure we're protecting ourselves as best we can. Obviously, backup fits in as your last line of defense. Hopefully, there's other mechanisms there in place to actually prevent it ever getting to that point. But obviously, we need to mitigate that risk. And, obviously, using a structured approach to ensure greater success in recovering to avoid, an ineffective or failed recovery. So some of the best practice things that I've put together is starting with encrypting your backups. So in ShadowProtect, when you create a backup job, encryption is enabled by default. You need to put in a strong alphanumeric password, okay? Just because the backups are encrypted, that doesn't mean they're safe. At the end of the day, these backups are just a file that's sitting somewhere on some storage. Some other software could get in there and corrupt those backups. Crypto could get in there and re-encrypt these backups over the top. But by encrypting the backups, what it means is nothing can gain access in and see what that data is or try and infect the inside of those backups. So encryption is best practice. It's recommended. It's required by the StorageCraft cloud services. But regardless, if people are shipping data offsite or there was some sort of data breach, if those backups aren't encrypted, then someone's got access to all of that company data. And one of the things now with ransomware is they're getting quite clever, and they're saying, well, look, in case you don't pay us, we've actually got a snapshot of some of your data, and we're going to start publishing it online, and actually holding you accountable or blackmailing you. So, encrypting stuff is important to ensure that nothing's actually going to gain access to the data. But as I said, that doesn't necessarily save everything. So the next step I've got in here is protecting local network shares. So one of the tips I've got in here is putting a $ at the end of your share. That simply makes it a hidden share, or sometimes they call it administrative share, but it stops it broadcasting that share on your network. The reality is I don't want some ransomware to start scanning your network and find my backups. I want to hide them. And this is, a nice way to start. Some of the NASs out there will still seem to, particularly those Linux firmware Samba file sharing protocol will sometimes still have a bit of chatter on the network around these shares. So it's not always going to be your fail-safe. But the next thing to look at is restricting shared folder access. So actually setting up permissions, NTFS and sharing permissions to the share. So starting on the left there, I've just got a screenshot of the shared permissions. So you need a user account, and ideally it would be a local account, not even a domain account, and only that user has got access to that share. I don't want any other user on the network with any form of access to those backups. I don't want myself as an admin, I shouldn't have access either. If you think about a scenario, perhaps customer rings me up and they say, look, my computer's playing up, can you please jump on and have a look? And you log on and something's not quite right. You might even log on as an admin user to try and deal with the problem. What would then happen if that did have ransomware is it might use your permissions to try and access other parts of the network. And again, if I had access to this, maybe it would try and use my permissions if the user had access. So that's the key thing is, set the permissions, but also don't ever map network drives or give people, UNC shortcuts or any type of access to that share, because that's just exposing further risk. So we really need to lock that down. That user I've called SPX there, that user is only being used by the ShadowProtect software. That's the only thing that can talk to that share. Then obviously you've got the NTFS permission. So obviously if it's on a NAS, you might not have that level of control. But on a backup server, again, ideally the backup server might not even be on the domain. That way it would stop anything else from, invoking that type of permission to take control. But that does get a little bit more challenging on that machine. Obviously, our image manager software running a system needs access. When you log on to that server itself, you might need some form of control. So you do have to work within the parameters there of what can access that. But again, NTFS level permissions, my users do not have access to touch that folder or any of the data within it. So this is really key. Another one. SMB1. This was the big thing with WannaCry, right? It was targeting a bug in SMB1. I think now the next version of Windows 10 might even be in the Creative Edition. I think I read an article that was about in June, I think. They said the next version of Windows 10 will not have SMB1 enabled. So this is obviously another thing. If we're not using this type of service, then we want to limit the exposure, right? And look at what devices are leveraging that and look at changing it. So that's a really important one. Offsite replication. So again, I touched on this earlier. A continuous incremental chain with ShadowProtect, regardless of ransomware type scenarios, you need to have a second copy. A continuous chain only has one base image. It's got consolidated shortest pathed images in that chain that we're totally dependent on to recover. So, if you've got all those backups sitting on one disk and it had bit rot or some sort of corruption, then we're putting ourselves at risk. Maybe you've got RAID in there, that's even better. But if something happened to those images, whether someone deleted something, it got corrupt, ransomware hit it, we want to know that we've got another copy somewhere else. Now, I've had a lot of partners that have used NAS to NAS replication, and I'll just pick on, say, QNAP or Netgear or any one of these, right? They've all got the ability somehow to replicate a copy to another site. The problem is, there's a couple of problems, right? The first thing is, it's replicating all my consolidation. So it's actually doubling up on the bandwidth, which we could get around by simply running another image manager at the remote site. Secondly, if my backups did get infected or did get corrupted, that NAS doesn't know that. It's going to replicate that corruption to the remote site and put my data at the other end at risk as well. And thirdly, generally you're not running a second image manager to re-verify that data. So what we want to do is we want to use image manager to handle the replication. We don't want to use third-party tools. And what image manager does is as ShadowProtect does a backup, it will automatically verify that that file hasn't been tampered with and it's okay. It will then periodically re-verify that all the backups that it's managing are okay. So that's important. The second thing is only replicate stuff once. So once it's been verified, it will replicate it and it won't send it again. So if something did get corrupt on site, it's then not going to try and replicate it again. Now, the next thing is replicating off-site, because obviously within your network, we could replicate to another NAS or to some other storage, but it's on the same network. There's still a risk there that that data could be, targeted by some form of malicious activity. So with Image Manager 7, which has been available now for at least 6 months, includes intelligent FTP for free. So we're using FTP technology to replicate to your own remote site, to a partner or a data center environment, So FTP is a lot more secured. You're authenticating over that. You can use SFTP to further encrypt that transmission, but that is securely and safely moving that data somewhere else. At that remote site, you're running Image Manager to re-verify the data. So you're always knowing that both ends are okay. We introduced recently in Image Manager 7.5 the ability to replicate to S3. So again, it's giving you another copy of the backups, and perhaps you might have some long-term archival or compliance requirements, and that's where that could be really great. And then there's your sort of your 3, 2, 1, StorageCraft Cloud Services. So you've got to understand that this is purpose-built for disaster recovery. The StorageCraft Cloud Services does not hold a copy of your backup chain, okay? We get your backups, we convert the whole lot into a single recovery point. It's a single point in time that we can virtualize rapidly for you. It doesn't give you all of the points in your backup chain. So yes, we can recover your server based on the retention you've got in the cloud, but what our cloud doesn't do is it doesn't give you the ability to pull back, a monthly consolidated file from 3 months ago or last week's weekly consolidated file. It doesn't have a copy of the images. So that's where it's always good to have a copy somewhere else. Worst case, you can only replicate off to one location based on bandwidth. Look, have a USB drive, have a NAS, have a second copy on site to give you some form of copy of that data. But the cloud's obviously going to give you, again, that last sort of line of defense or recovery, really, to recover the whole machine if all else fails. So I think that's really key, is understanding the replication with our technology built into Image Manager will only replicate stuff once, and once it's been verified. So it's really isolating that remote site from any type of impact that could happen locally. And then just finally, some further recommendations. So obviously, endpoint protection. We need to look at antivirus, anti-malware, type scenarios. You need to look at your firewalls as well. You need to be patching your systems. Obviously, Windows, Microsoft try to address a lot of these inherent bugs and issues that they're exploiting. We need to implement software restrictions. So, that's important because we don't want users necessarily having access to run certain things or access certain things. So I think that's important, looking at your group policy and reviewing administrative access. And as I mentioned, that's a permissions thing. Making sure people don't have access to stuff they don't need reduces the impact of any type of malicious activity. And then finally, testing your recovery plan. So as I mentioned, Image Manager's got built-in advanced verification capabilities, but it's not just, you can automate a lot of this stuff, right? But it also comes down to a plan that's in place, and it's making sure your team are all on top of what needs to be done. If you work in an office of 20 guys and there's only one person, rostered on for out of hours and he's got to respond, then each of those people need to understand the DR process. They need to have gone through a test recovery so that they understand the process themselves. They've done it before. It's likely to be a high stress situation where the customer's demanding their data back, and it would be time sensitive. So the test isn't just to ensure that the backups are okay. It's actually testing the whole plan, testing, how does my servers respond in the cloud when I fail over there or offsite, or how do I deal with the networking, or where do the users go and how do they access that data? These are all key things that people need to think about. They need to do their own testing. And this really falls into the StorageCraft 100K guarantee. So last week, StorageCraft announced a $100,000 guarantee. It is aligned with our platinum partners. So again, we're encouraging you guys to get certified. But what we're saying is, if you're doing tests on-prem or in the cloud and you can't recover based on, following the guidelines, then StorageCraft can honor that up to $100,000. So it's a pretty powerful message. We're really putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak, there, and saying, we're confident in our technology based on you guys doing your testing, ensuring that it's working, and keeping on top of that. Then that's what the technology is designed for. But I think we've covered off some of that key best practice and what you guys need to be aware of today. I think that really brings me to the end of my session. So it's been relatively quick, although we are coming up to the end of the webinar. So guys, if you've got any questions, if there's anything you want to see that I've covered off, I can bring up a system and show you any of the settings that we've talked about, or discuss in more detail. Please use the questions option in the webinar. I think there's might be one or two just popping up now, so I'll just jump in and take a look. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much wrapped up for today, and I'll just address any questions that come through. Cool. So, Will, you've asked if we can get a copy of the materials. So, yeah, I don't see why not, actually. I can, let me tell you what, I'll try and add it in now as a handout. So I'll go in here. Cool. So I'm just uploading the PowerPoint now that I've used. It's 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, nearly done. So hopefully you guys will actually see an option as a handout. It's saying that it's there now. So hopefully you guys can download that. Otherwise, again, as I mentioned, we will be sending up a follow-up email that contains a link to this webinar. It'll also be posted on our StorageCraft APAC YouTube channel. So I'll just bring that up quickly. If you just Google StorageCraft APAC YouTube, you'll get our local YouTube channel here, and there's a series down here called StorageCraft Webinar Series. Now, some of these are recent, but the previous ones are all about 2 years old. So this is the first webinar for the series that we're doing, and they'll be uploaded into this playlist here over the coming weeks as the webinars happen. So yeah, all that content that I've covered off today will be available there, and I have uploaded the handout here, which you've got. Awesome. All right, guys, there's no other questions. Again, if anyone's got anything, please feel free to type it in. I'm happy to discuss any type of question you have. If there's a particular scenario that you want to run by me, I've got a couple of minutes now. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to the team, and you know, one of our sales engineers can get on a call or organize a remote session with you, or come out and visit you and give you some help. But you know, securing those backups, you know, we can't just ignore them. We've got to make sure those permissions are secured down. Question about the pricing for S3. So there's no cost at all. If you look at our website, Image Manager, that's what handles all the replication. So Image Manager is a free software. The latest version of Image Manager under our software downloads and updates is 7.5. If I just scroll down here, 7.5.0. So this includes free S3 replication. So yeah, let me just bring it up. I'll bring up Image Manager here. So if I right click on a server, create job, replication, the options available is obviously local drive to a local disk, to a NAS on the network. FTP is for offsite replication. ShadowStream server, ShadowStream is still a licensed feature in Image Manager. So I think that's around 300 AU dollars for a license. So you'd need one of them per machine to replicate to a remote site running the ShadowStream server. Most people are probably leveraging the free FTP these days. We've seen it's a slightly simpler technology to leverage, but S3 is now also available. So there's no cost for S3 replication. It is included for free in Image Manager. It's S3 compatible, so we've seen a lot of other S3 providers outside of Amazon that this will work with as well. But yeah, otherwise, really, you're up to leveraging your own S3 account and the associated costs with that. But the replication from our software, there's no license to leverage that, which is pretty cool. And kind of as I was saying before, really, that these options are complementary to replicating to the StorageCraft cloud. The StorageCraft cloud is, you know, to rapidly virtualize in the cloud, but replicating somewhere else might be giving you longer-term archive or a second copy of the backup. So it's still a good idea to consider, you know, having additional copies of those backups. So, you know, if something did go wrong on my image chain, I just want to pull back that file, or you know, I might have low retention on site based on storage, but you know, maybe in S3 I'll have, you know, much longer retention option. So yeah, all right, well, that seems to be all the questions. We're just coming up to the time frame now. So again, if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to reach out to anyone in our team. And again, appreciate your time. Cheers.